Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2022 William K. Reilly Awards ceremony for environmental leadership. This is the 10th year, and it's been a very gratifying experience to work with Bill Reilly and people at the School of Public Affairs on this program. I think Bill and many other people have used this program to provide role models for our students and just some tremendous resources. And we're very grateful for this relationship with Bill Reilly. And I will be introducing him in a bit more detail later, but let me just tell you what our program consists of today. So first we'll hear from Vicki Wilkins, the Dean of the School of Public Affairs, and then some remarks from Bill Reilly, who will also present the awards to our 2 scholarship winners for this year. And then we will proceed to our Environmental Leadership Awards with introductions by Dr. Mamie Parker and Dr. Terry Yossi, both members of the Program Advisory Board of the Center for Environmental Policy. And they will present the Leadership Awards to Coleman Flowers and Polman. So we will move into our program. Thanks everybody for joining us. So first let me introduce our Dean, Vicki Wilkins. She has been Dean of the School of Public Affairs since 2018 officially. Vicki Wilkins is a scholar on such topics as representative bureaucracy, political institutions, and human resource management. She teaches a course on managing human capital assets. Vicki taught previously at the University of Georgia and joined American University in 2014. And she's been a great friend of the Center for Environmental Policy and of the Reilly Environmental Leadership Program. So please welcome, to the extent you can over Zoom, please welcome Dean Vicki Wilkins. Vicki.
Thank you, Dan, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 10th annual William K. Reilly Awards ceremony. The awards given today are an excellent way to encourage and reward our students with interests in environmental and energy policy, as well as to recognize leaders in the field. Today, we are pleased to recognize the outstanding accomplishments of Paul Polman and Coleman Flowers. Their contributions to environmental sustainability and environmental justice. Both have made a tremendous impact, although in very different roles. Paul has been a leader in corporate sustainability and Catherine in environmental justice, especially in providing clean and safe water for vulnerable populations. Congratulations also to the winners of the William K. Reilly Scholarship Awards, Taylor Reed and Stephanie Strickland. These awards are given each year to 2 students in our MPA and MPP programs. These students have outstanding academic achievements and a commitment to careers in environmental, energy, or sustainability fields. Taylor and Stephanie are our 22nd and 23rd Reilly Scholars. I'm proud to say that this year, the School of Public Affairs was ranked 10th among public affairs schools. Environmental and energy policy is an important part of this ranking. Our students have gone on to careers in such organizations as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, D.C. Department of Energy and Environment, Potomac Riverkeepers Network, the National Governors Association, consulting firms, and elsewhere. Our relationship with Bill Reilly has been a tremendous asset to the university and the School of Public Affairs, and to me personally. For many years, we've held this event in person and regularly draw crowds of 150 people from the environmental policy community. Bill has opened doors to leading thinkers and organizations in the field. His career has inspired our students. Thank you, Bill, for all you've done for American University. And I thank everyone for joining us here today. We hope to see you again next year when we're back in person and resume our annual gatherings And finally, my congratulations to all of our awardees. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki, for getting us started. So before I turn the program over to Bill Reilly, I just want to introduce two members of our Program Advisory Board who will be introducing our award winners. So let me do that, and then we will talk about Bill for a minute. Dr. Mamie Parker, of course, is a member of our advisory board. She's a professional fish and wildlife biologist and the first Black woman regional director of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and later led the Fisheries Service nationally. She's done a variety of really important forms of work in the natural resources field, including serving as the elected chair of Virginia's Department of Wildlife Resources Board. She is very active as a mentor in the natural resources community, working with students, and received the Presidential Rank Award, the highest honor bestowed on federal employees. So we're very glad to have Mamie on our board and with us on the program today. And Dr. Terry Yossi is a longtime friend and colleague. I first knew Terry, I think, as the director of the EPA Science Advisory Board some years ago. Since then, he's had a number of other important roles, including Chief Executive Officer of the World Environment Center. Terry writes a monthly column for greenbiz.com and is a sustainability advisor to major global companies, but he writes very thoughtfully on issues of science, sustainability, and corporate leadership. So thank you, Mamie and Terry, for joining us today. And so we'll be getting to your part of the program in a little while. So let me now talk a bit about Bill Reilly before I turn the program over to him. Many people know a lot about Bill, particularly if you've been part of this program before. Bill began working in the environmental field, I think, in about 1970 as a member of the senior staff at the Council on Environmental Quality. Bill later served as president of World Wildlife Fund in the US, and then was appointed administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency by President George H.W. Bush in 1989. I recall during Bill's years at EPA, some of the really important contributions. One was, of course, implementing the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, which were a major effort, expansion of EPA's international profile and capabilities, enhancing attention to ecological issues and challenges, and doing a lot of the early work to build EPA's capacity to address climate change. Bill since then has taught at Stanford, led an international water investment firm with TPG Capital, served as co-chair of President Obama's Deepwater Horizon Oil Spill Commission, and of course has worked closely with American University, a number of other universities, served on many boards, but I think has been an inspiration to our students. And when the first Reilly program in 2013, I said that Bill was one of my leadership heroes. I still have that view, except perhaps even more so, having gotten to know Bill. So I'm very happy now to present William K. Reilly. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Dan. Am I coming through okay? Good. Well, good afternoon. Actually, good morning to me, from me. I'm in California today. I want to say, first of all, how much I admire and respect the School of Public Affairs and the quality of the faculty, Dan, Vicki, and the others, and the students that you have developed over the years, and many of whom I have gotten to know, and the award winners particularly gotten to know personally. I think that it's not that well known that the American University was established during the Franklin Roosevelt administration to serve as a cockpit of practical policy innovation for the initiatives that were coming fast and furiously in that time in the New Deal. And the School of Public Affairs has maintained that tradition, I think, very faithfully. When I look at the strengths that I have seen from the school and in the winners, they are twofold, and they're very common. One is a sophisticated integration of academics. Both of our winners today are distinguished in that field, as Vicki mentioned, and also considerable practical experience. That is, they have typically, certainly by the time they've gotten to this point, applied their skills, demonstrated their capability in the real world, and developed a much clearer idea, I must say, about how they want to contribute to the world at large than I did at their age. So I feel so proud of the association I've had with the winners. Today's winners are in that tradition. Stephanie Strickland, expert in science, technology, and environment, which kind of sums it up. But if you want to influence public policy, it's all there in her background and her studies and her experience. She is a very distinguished linguist, several languages, including native Spanish, a Florida State graduate, and a citizen of Florida. I encouraged her when I talked to her. She said that she was very interested in having a career in international public policy, and I couldn't help saying, because I go to Florida with a board that I'm on regularly, that Florida really needs help. Florida needs help with adaptation, particularly of climate. It's going to have as much or more impact, given its long seacoast, as any other state in the union. So Stephanie is I think going to go on to do great things. She's had experience in Washington. She has demonstrated her international capability and prepared, I think, so well for a career in the kind of international public policy domain that she aspires to. Stephanie, congratulations.
Thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate having received this award. So as Bill mentioned, I'm from Florida. I grew up in Jacksonville. I tend to describe it to people from up here as the first city you hit if you go south on 95 when you get into Florida. And I spent many years in Tallahassee at Florida State University, and then I worked there for a little while afterwards as well. And there I studied Spanish and Italian as my major, and then my minors were in environmental science and policy management and Portuguese. So I kind of dipped my toe into most of the Romance languages, although didn't hit French while I was in college. And as I mentioned, I'm just so grateful to receive this award. I moved up to the DC area a couple of years ago in 2018 with the aspiration to work on climate issues that are already affecting my state, including sunny day flooding, sea level rise, intensified storms. There are storms that are hitting in places they hadn't hit before. And so in Florida, we really see the effects of climate change very directly and very immediately. And so I am very grateful to be at American University and to have received this award, as it helps me feel that I'm on the next step and I'm in the place that I need to be to make the change that I really want to make.
You are, Stephanie. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Taylor Reed is from California. She's from Manteca, California, graduate of San Diego State. And her interest is in the convergence of environmental policy and public health, which is, as we discussed last week together, the merger that politically was very consequential for the United States. When the conservation community began to focus on health and the health community began to see the advantages in environmental protection and health impacts of a bad environment, that formed a really irresistible body of opinion and strength politically in the United States in the late 60s and early 70s, and helps explain how the environmental rally came to be. Well, Taylor has been a Fulbright scholar in Wales. She studied their approach to sustainable energy and policy, and works now in the California House of Representatives on just about everything that can go wrong or has gone wrong in California: drought relief, wildfires, land subsidence, gas costs, the kinds of political issues that come to the front of any consideration of policy in California. And I think it's got a tremendous practical background. We discussed water policy and water availability and contamination in Central Valley. Obviously, Taylor is very knowledgeable about it, more than I am, and has had experience with legislative policy to the point that I think she's extremely well equipped to go on and do the kinds of things that she aspires to do. And I am very pleased to introduce Taylor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Reilly, for your kind introduction. It's an honor to receive the William K. Reilly Scholarship from American University's Center for Environmental Policy. As Bill mentioned, I'm a first-year Master's of Public Administration student here in the School of Public Affairs. I was born and raised in Manteca, California, in California's Central Valley, and received my Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science and Women's Studies at San Diego State University last May in 2021. During my undergraduate studies, I received a Fulbright United Kingdom Summer Institute Award to study international politics at Aberystwyth University in Wales. While at Aberystwyth University, I explored a sustainable energy research institution, sparking my interest in the intersection of environmental policy and public health. Currently, I'm a legislative fellow for a California member of the House of Representatives with a policy portfolio in drought relief, wildfires, air quality, and energy. In my role, I've assisted with writing legislation and working with federal agencies to implement innovative solutions to poor air quality, land subsidence, and the high gasoline costs that constituents in California's Central Valley, where I'm from, have been experiencing. As I reflect in my first year in the Master of Public Administration program, American University's courses and professors have encouraged me to connect my current congressional environmental policy work to the challenges and topics we explore in our coursework. With this scholarship, I plan to continue to ensure that my interest in the intersection of environmental policy and public health is addressed in my master's courses, in the federal legislation I help write, and the federal agencies I work with. Personally, I believe that the present challenges of the climate crisis require immediate action and scientifically based solutions to provide all communities with a sustainable and equitable future. Specifically, this is why, after graduation, I intend to continue my federal environmental policy work as a congressional legislative assistant with a policy portfolio similar to the one that I have now in air quality, water, wildfires, energy, and adding healthcare. Some of the environmental policy and public health issues I hope to continue to take action on in my future work is zero emission technology to ensure that communities like my home community of the Central Valley in California sees a reduction in the high particulate matter and ozone air pollution, decreasing the rate of asthma and respiratory illnesses in our region. Another career aspiration of mine is to help ensure that federal and state agencies have the data they need on land subsidence and wildfires to build climate resilient infrastructure that meets the needs of communities for decades to come. Finally, I have an interest in working with rural and underserved communities with contaminated drinking water to help them gain access to state-of-the-art filtration systems and pipe replacements to ensure that all communities have access to safe drinking water. As environmental policy continues to be at the forefront of solving the climate crisis, the solutions must safeguard public health, particularly in underserved and rural communities. Therefore, being awarded the William K. Reilly Scholarship has provided me with the additional security and confidence that my pursuit of environmental policy and public health is a welcome addition to the growing field of environmental policy. Again, thank you to American University's Center for Environmental Policy and Mr. Reilly for this prestigious award and for believing in my current and future contributions to this field. A special thank you to my friends and family and colleagues, some are on the call today, for always supporting me and encouraging my ambitions. So I'll turn it back over to Mr. Reilly now. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. I look at you and Stephanie, and I am stunned by the mastery that you have already achieved in relatively young lives. The issues you have chosen to address are first and forefront, as you know, are the issues that really perplex our time and to which we have to have solutions to save the planet. I wish you both well. I think that you're obviously going to make a very important contribution to public policy in the sphere in which you are chosen to operate. And I'm so proud to have my name associated with you. Thank you.
And thank you, Bill, for doing a wonderful job and inspiring all of us to want to be more and do more. We really appreciate that. Again, I'm Mamie Parker, and a board member, but also a previous Reilly Award recipient. And again, thanks to you, Bill, for inspiring us to want more and to inspire students to be more. My heart smiles now, and it is truly an honor to introduce our 2022 William K. Reilly Award winner, a champion, a fighter, a teacher, someone that's inspirational. She has that passion, she has that inspiration and that excellence that we want to see in each other and in our students. Currently, Catherine Coleman Flowers is the founding director of the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice. She is a practitioner in residence at Duke University, the Human Rights Center at the Franklin Humanities Institute. Catherine is an author of the Columbia University publication, Flushed and Forgotten, which is a sanitation and wastewater in rural communities in the United States publication. Last fall, she released her book about her journey entitled Waste, One Woman's Fight Against America's Dirty Secret. A very impressive group of individuals, including Senator Bernie Sanders, Jane Fonda, Reverend Dr. William Barber, Senator John Kerry, the New Yorker, and the Smithsonian publication praised her as that champion fighter that I mentioned earlier, one who amplifies the voices of the poorest of the poorest, the Black people and residents in Lowndes County, Alabama. While she's held other positions in economic development at the NAACP, she's been a great advocate in many of those roles. What I'm most inspired by, because as a fish and wildlife biologist and environmentalist myself, I think about my 9th grade teacher introduced me to Marvin Gaye's song, Mercy, Mercy Me, and inspired me to want to do more for the environment. Catherine was also a teacher. In fact, an outstanding teacher in the Detroit Public Schools. She also worked in Holmes County Public Schools and here in the Washington, D.C. area district of Columbia Public Schools. She teaches and now mentors undergraduates, master's degree and PhD students at Duke University. Last week, NBC News featured Catherine and her teachings with Yamis Alcindor and millions of Americans as they heard about raw sewage and forgotten people of her home county in Alabama. You can hear more about that too on NPR Fresh Air or 60 Minutes or many other shows that she's had the privilege to be on. Catherine, a waymaker, Catherine, a miracle worker, Catherine, a light in the darkness. That is who you are. Our beloved sister Catherine Coleman Flowers is also a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, a Catalyst for Change Award, and again, where she gets the chance to teach others and create that spark of change with some financial resources, quite a bit of financial resources also. She uses her voice with these funds to talk about many different things, including some of the people in her home county that have hookworms and intestinal parasites from the wastewater that they have in their community. She teaches us, she taught me not to focus on the various awards that we've received, but focus on the people and the need of our support. She teaches us that as she has received numerous awards, including Alabama's Women Who Shaped the State Award, as well as the Grist 50 Fixer Award, in which former Vice President Al Gore nominated her. I mentioned that she was a champion fighter. She's also a teacher, but she's also an inspiration. And she's spoken in many, many different places, and I can only highlight a few here, but the Aspen Nicholas Water Forum, that was a virtual event last fall that she had a chance to be a part of. The Bloomberg Green Virtual Conference, she was there as a panelist with some other individuals talking about environmental justice issues. Catherine has been at the United Nations talking in Switzerland on poverty and inequity in America under the Trump administration, human rights under the threats, but also she was in Switzerland speaking at the United Nations, the American Civil Liberties Union and the United States Human Rights Network side event, she was there. Again, a fighter, a teacher, and inspiration. And speaking of inspiration, we are all inspired by you, Catherine. And talking to you, I learned that we have a lot in common as Black women in the environment, Black women with similar struggles, with isolation and often challenged by not being acknowledged or heard. But in spite of that, you've made major accomplishment. Proud of our connections as girls raised in the South, grit girls, Alabama, and some Arkansas roots. And speaking of Arkansas, the home of the great poet, Mother Maya Angelou, your motto, your role model, and your motto, and still I rise, a poem written by Maya. The poem has many great messages in it. The one in which you mentioned to me that I think was important: you may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I rise. Up from the past that rooted in pain, I rise. I am a Black ocean leaping wide, welling and swelling, I hear in the tide, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Catherine, you have inspired all of us as a teacher, as a fighter, as one who inspires us to rise. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to congratulate, to celebrate, and to welcome our 2022 William K. Reilly Award winner, Catherine Coleman Flowers. Congratulations, Catherine.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I am just honored, first of all, by that introduction. Wow. Wow, it's something about us being these country girls from Alabama and Arkansas. It's fantastic. And I think it goes a long way into making us become the environmentalists and caring for the planet the way we do. But I'd also like to thank the American University, the Center for Environmental Policy, and the School of Public Affairs, and of course, Mr. Reilly, for this prestigious award. Thank you very much. And I will display it proudly in my home. You know, years ago, I spent a summer in Friendship Heights with a family that was aligned with the Kennedy family. The Hackett family had been very much tied to the Kennedys because David Hackett and Robert Kennedy went to boarding school together. Actually, when I went to Washington in 1975, I went as a Robert Kennedy Youth Fellow, and the memorial was located in Georgetown at around 30th and K Street. And I used to get on the bus in Georgetown, going back to Friendship Heights where my host family lived, and would pass the American University. Never in my wildest dreams did this young girl from Lowndes County, Alabama, ever imagine that this day would come, that I would be receiving this award, and that the American University would factor into the work that I'm doing now and in the future. So I'm very, very thankful for that. I also learned during that time that there were divisions that we had that could be resolved when we found that we had common interests. The Hackett family, David was from Boston. His wife, Judith, was from London. They had actually met at where she was when she was dancing with the Royal Dance Academy of London, and she was in Canada when Robert Kennedy actually introduced Dave and Judith, who became man and wife. But when I was in their home, as time went on, I didn't see those divisions. And I think that those divisions, in terms of the things that separated us and made us different, even when I ended up going to Bethesda Chevy Chase High School for that summer, taking English as a second language, the only child in the class who was not the child of diplomats who had come to the United States to serve the diplomatic corps. It was an opportunity for me to learn, and all those lessons I've applied those lessons even when it comes to dealing with our common home, which is Earth. It was during that time that I started to understand there were differences between rural communities and urban communities. Coming from Lowndes County, Alabama, at that time in the 1970s, where people were still walking to other people's homes to get water and carried it in buckets, where people were still using manual pumps to get water, where they didn't have, where pipes were not going everywhere and taking water everywhere. That happened in the 1970s and the 1980s, where people were still flushing if they had a toilet in the house and was going out on top of the ground, or they had outhouses. But things evolved and changed, and I went away and had the opportunity to go to Washington much later as a teacher and served. And during the 25th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March, was able to take my students to Lowndes County when DC was the murder capital of the country to learn about the civil rights movement. But it was during those times that I was able to understand the intersectionality between environmental justice and also climate change and climate justice. I didn't know it was called climate change at the time, but I knew that changes were taking place because I could see the changes in the seasons. I could see the changes in the vegetation, all the things that I learned to pay attention to when I was growing up as a child in Lowndes County, walking those dirt roads, which were not paved at the time. Most of them didn't even have names. You couldn't tell where you were going unless you knew where you were going. But I also understood and appreciate the uniqueness of rural communities and why it's so important for people from rural communities to make rural policies. And there's no template that fits, because the things that may apply in urban areas would exclude and discriminate against rural communities, in my view, making them environmental justice communities as well. And my home, Lowndes County, which is located between Selma and Montgomery, a place that has so much history. Everybody knows about Montgomery being the home of the modern day civil rights movement. But there was also an agrarian struggle that took place in Lowndes County, going back to the time when W.E.B. Du Bois came there in the early 1900s because of what was happening around the sharecroppers organizing and the fight for labor rights. And then going on into the 1960s, where there was a fight for voting rights. And now we're at the intersection of the fight for environmental justice and the fight for sanitation equity. But what we have found, as we found in the 1960s, that the fight that has gone on in Lowndes County is not just a Lowndes County fight. It's a fight throughout rural America, where rural communities have been denied access, where when people make decisions and make policy decisions, oftentimes rural communities are left out. I read today an op-ed that was in the New York Times. It was a political op-ed, but it speaks to what I'm talking about today. And the authors talked about how politicians don't even go and campaign in rural communities. They don't visit, they've just written them off. And it's a large part of America. And as we talk about climate change and how we're going to address these issues that are before us, rural communities have to factor into the solution. Primarily because, one, if we can't find infrastructure that can work there, it's just a matter of time before the infrastructure fails in the cities. I recently saw that in Mount Vernon, New York, when I went there in June of last year, and saw because of climate change, because of the frequency of the storms that are coming in, bringing lots of water, that their systems were failing, bringing sewage back in their homes. We really started 20 years ago, but became more prevalent as of late because of the changes that are taking place really fast. I've also seen it in places like in the Central Valley when I went to when I went to Allensworth, where the big growers have sucked so much of the water out of so much of the groundwater they've used that the natural deforming arsenic is greater than the parts of water, and the water cannot be drained. Or there are places around the country where people are turning on the tap and nothing is coming out, where the snowpacks are not what they were to replenish the aquifers because of climate change. Because we're seeing greater and greater storms. Whenever a storm happens in Texas, I have to be concerned where I live. And I live currently in Madison, Alabama, which is in the Tennessee Valley. But when a storm happens in Texas, the storms are so big that ultimately they're going to create havoc here. Recently, I was on an airplane flying actually to Mount Vernon, where the governor of New York awarded them $150 million because of our alliance with the National Resource Defense Council to help the town of Mount Vernon deal with its wastewater issue. And that was a victory. But my flight could not land because the weather system that came through shut down all the airports in New York. That's going to become more common. We had to circle BWI for a while and then land and sit on the ground for 2 hours. A flight that normally would have been about 1 hour and 40 minutes took 6 hours because we could not land because of the weather system. Those are things that are going to become more common. And the recent IPCC report is frightening to me, and it should be frightening to all of us because we have to take action. And we're going to have to take action with this Biden administration, like to say, the whole of government approach, but we need the whole approach as it relates to all of us coming together to find solutions to make sure that we build resilience and have a sustainable planet that can sustain life for all of us. I'm very concerned. Because of that concern, when I won the MacArthur Award, I actually relocated part of my Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice, and we moved to Madison, Alabama. Madison, Alabama is right outside of the Huntsville area. Why did I choose the Huntsville area? I chose it because it's the home of the Marshall Space Flight Center. The Marshall Space Flight Center was named for General Marshall, who became a Secretary of State, who ultimately led the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. We're going to have to do the same thing and have that same type of intentionality to deal with climate change. And we can do that through environmental justice, because the environmental justice communities are on the front lines of these issues in terms of climate justice. That's where the pollution is. That's where all the carbon is going into the air. They also have the failed infrastructure that is not resilient. And those communities are throughout the United States in urban and rural areas. But a lot of the rural communities tend to be not included or left behind. And I'm hoping that we can change that. My organization is going to launch, and we've already incorporated the Climate, Water, and Sanitation Innovation Center, because there's a need for us to innovate our way out of what we have created. We're going to have to create more resilient systems. We can't just replace what we have with what we already have because it was not built taking into account climate change. One of the things that I have shed light on is the failing sanitation systems, especially wastewater systems, septic systems that are put in rural communities. Most recently, we hosted Michael Regan and members of USDA's Office of Rural Development to see how these systems are failing in Lowndes County, Alabama. They're not just failing there, they're failing throughout the United States. And a recent report showed that with sea level rise, they're going to start to fail everywhere like they are in Mount Vernon, New York. And we're going to have to come up with ways to address that. At the Marshall Space Flight Center, they have learned how to take urine and turn it into drinking water. I know some of us may frown upon that, but we don't have a choice. They just speeded up the process that naturally occurs on Earth. And we're going to have to find ways to bridge these divides, to bring rural and urban together, to actually go and visit these areas and sit down and listen, to come up with the type of solutions that are necessary for us to be able to build a planet that will be able to sustain life for generations to come. As the grandmother of a 6-year-old, every day I wonder what life is going to be for him. We have 8 years. We have 8 years to get it together. We have 8 years to work together to find some long-term solutions. How do we decarbonize to a point where, since I've been in this house, and I've only been here since October, there was a point almost every week I had to go into a closet to hide and pray to make sure that the storm wouldn't destroy my home. That is going to become more common if we do not change the way we do things. If we do not go into these rural communities, look for solutions and have them part of it, because the farmers can help sequester some of the carbon through regenerative farming. These are the things that we have to do. And I hope that with this William K. Reilly Environmental Leadership Award, that it will also give me the type of credibility in communities to bring people together so we can come up with common solutions to save our common home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mamie and Catherine. It's a great honor to participate in this prestigious environmental awards program, and I want to echo the congratulations to Catherine for her magnificent achievements and receipt of the William K. Reilly Environmental Leadership Award. It's now my great personal and professional pleasure to introduce Paul Polman. This is the second opportunity I've had to honor Paul. In May of 2013, the World Environment Center honored Unilever with its Gold Medal Award for Corporate Achievement in Sustainable Development. Paul personally accepted that award in Washington, D.C., and delivered an inspired set of remarks. Where do once-in-a-generation CEOs like Paul Polman come from? Paul was born in the Netherlands in the mid-50s. His parents lived through the Second World War. His father, a tire company executive, and his mother, a school teacher, who later had to relinquish her position when she became pregnant. Already, we begin to get an early glimpse of where Paul's ambition and unceasing determination came from. Paul is married to Kim Polman, and they have 3 sons. Kim, a dedicated environmentalist, has her own very distinguished career and chairs the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa, a charity devoted to literacy for the blind and visually impaired in East Africa. Paul had planned to become a doctor, but in Holland, medical school placements were based on a lottery system, and Paul didn't get in. So, as an example of the resilience he's continually exhibited throughout his career, he changed his career path and received a bachelor's degree from the University of Groningen, and later an MBA in finance and international marketing in 1979 from the University of Cincinnati. Paul worked for 27 years for Procter & Gamble, beginning as a cost analyst, and ultimately became group president for Europe in 2001. He later joined Nestle in 2006 as chief financial officer and headed American operations. And in January 2009, he became CEO of Unilever. Now, I'm not going to summarize all of the awards and all of the accomplishments Paul has achieved. But as I look at the long arc of his career, 5 words come to mind: boldness, moral courage, innovative collaboration. Here are a few examples. Just 3 weeks into his job as CEO, he publicly announced that Unilever would no longer report quarterly earnings or provide financial guidance. His rationale was simple and powerful. The company couldn't focus on the future if it was trapped into thinking about the next quarter. Besides, after only 3 weeks on the job, the board would be reluctant to fire him this early in his tenure. One of the best examples highlighting Paul's skills was how Unilever responded to the hostile takeover attempt from Kraft Heinz in 2017, or as Paul refers to it, why mayo beat ketchup. There are many reasons why this attempt failed, but the fundamental reason is that Unilever outperformed Kraft Heinz and other companies in its business sector on both financial and environmental performance metrics. Across Paul's 10-year tenure, Unilever shareholders saw returns of 300%. The best known initiative during Paul's 10 years was the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. The virtue of USLP was that it combined business strategy and sustainability outcomes into one plan whose overarching objective was to decouple environmental impacts from the company's business growth. This was to be achieved through 3 major sustainability business goals and 55 separate performance metrics. USLP committed to more radical transparency, stakeholder accountability, and endless collaborations, both internal and external. At the end of 2018, Paul stepped down from Unilever and embarked on a new set of initiatives, including the formation of Imagine, a foundation and corporation designed to alleviate poverty and climate change. In 2021, Paul and Andrew Winston co-authored Net Positive. I've read every page of Net Positive, and I have to say it is one of the very best books ever written on sustainable business. It provides a roadmap for every major sustainable business challenge that a company faces: recruiting, motivating and retaining employees, managing investor relationships, designing and executing sustainable business strategies, advancing social justice, and how to design culture so it doesn't eat strategy. Net Positive is a must read. So I want to close with two quotes from Paul in Net Positive. First, he says that, "I have long believed that an economic system where still too many people feel they are not fully participating or are being left behind will ultimately rebel against itself. We are living in those times." Lastly, Paul quotes the late Desmond Tutu, who was once asked whether he was optimistic or pessimistic. Reverend Tutu said, "I am a prisoner of hope." Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce the recipient of the 2022 William K. Reilly Environmental Leadership Award, Paul Polman.
Well, thank you, Terry, for this kind introduction, and more importantly, great to see you again. It's a real honor, really, to get this award. In fact, I just landed in Geneva and I had it in my suitcase so I could share it with the customs officers, and they congratulated me as well. But I'd really dedicate it to the too many people that are still left behind in this world. It's great, as you had mentioned already again, to get another award from you, but hopefully this is the last time, because we need to concentrate all of our efforts on making things happen. And that's probably a better way of spending our time. But again, highly appreciated. And also for the work you're actually doing as an advisory council member for Dow. I've had the privilege of being 9 years on the board of Dow and seeing their sustainable strategy develop with Neil Hawkins and others that you're working with actively. And you can be proud because you're a key part of this. And then Bill, also an honor to receive this award, which is in your name. I could not think of a better honor for someone who actually dedicates his life, and we've all heard a lot of that in the introductions now, to making positive change, be it with the EPA or TPG or now on the incredibly important issue of water. Bill and I actually met a long time ago. He might not remember, but we had a European Climate Foundation dinner. I'm actually on the board of that. And then we probably barely missed each other on the board of Dow DuPont when we were looking at creating something bigger and better. But again, thanks for what you are spending your life on and being a true leader, putting yourself to the service of others. Certainly, you understand that by doing so, you're better off yourself as well. As a CEO of Unilever, I certainly understand the importance of water, sanitation and hygiene, which actually is goal number 6 in the Sustainable Development Goals, and becoming increasingly more urgent. Undoubtedly, your great friend Jeff Seabright, Bill, is also on the line. I'm very proud to say that it's really Jeff who wrote the book Net Positive, but he was too modest to want to have his name on it. And you and I know Jeff, so this must sound familiar with you. But again, also thanks to Catherine for her passionate speech from the heart. And I was looking at it and it dawned on me, Catherine, your name is Coleman, my name is Polman. We're only one letter apart, but impressed by what you're all doing and actually how it comes from the heart and how you indeed make clear to people that climate change and inequality are two sides of the same coin. This climate justice is a very important thing. I work very actively with Mary Robinson, and but seeing that there is another Mary Robinson in the United States, passionately working that as well, as we've seen with COVID, how important that is, that the ones that continue to pay the price for, frankly, our shortcomings continue to also suffer from things like COVID and climate change. And then finally, congratulations to Stephanie and Taylor. What incredible recognitions, but also how graciously you accepted that, and your career plans only make me realize that probably I would never have been accepted in universities anymore today if I had to compete with people like yourselves. But congratulations once more. And then American University, a long history of preparing the students for careers in public service, which is becoming more important, your strong research agenda, and then a strong supporter for what I believe is the need actually to change the face of education. I'm myself the chair of the Said Business School at Oxford and on the board of ESA and INSEAD, as well as PRIME, which is the Principles for Responsible Management Education. And one of the key things that we really need is to galvanize broader change in at university level as well, not only in businesses. And we know how difficult that is, but universities have such an important contribution to make in all of this. We clearly are short of leaders and trees in this world to attack the issues. Societal leaders who understand the power of partnerships and can operate across disciplines, that operate with a high level of purpose, are systemic thinkers. I call them perhaps moral or cooperative leaders versus the too many self-serving competitive ones that we still have around. And unfortunately, we still see too many universities that relegate sustainability just to an elective or as a side course. But we all agree that it just needs to be part of every course. It needs to be the core of every curriculum. It needs to be the center of education because sustainability affects every business now, affects everybody, every function from finance to marketing to strategy, as well as the increasingly important need for these partnerships for which you also need to be the broader, have a broader understanding of government policies and regulations as well. So doing this award and setting the standards higher, I can only compliment you on this and being part of this broader change that we need to drive in education. You know, I don't have to tell this audience, but our global economic system is broken. I think we've now finally discovered that we can't have infinite growth on the finite planet. Last year, World Overshoot Day, which was the day that we use up more resources than the world can replenish, was July 29th. I would argue that after that day, every day after, we're actually stealing from future generations. I just don't want to be part of that. We're living well beyond our planetary boundaries. This wonderful world is 4.6 billion years old. And for simplicity, if I put it on a scale of 46 years, human beings have only been around for 4 hours. The Industrial Revolution only started 1 minute ago. And in that 1 minute, we've cut half the world's forests. And the numbers keep going up. In the last 5 decades, we've lost 68% of the world's species, mammals, vertebrates, or birds. Real simple question is, when is it our turn? Some people call it the 6th greatest extinction. And frankly, we are well off on climate change as well. As was being mentioned before, we're still projecting well above the 2 degrees when we know that we can only afford 1.5 degrees. This decade, indeed, the 8 years that we have left, is still projecting a 14% increase in climate emissions when we know we need to cut it by at least 45%. And frankly, the tragedies that are unfolding here, not far from us in Europe, with the tragic war now in the Ukraine, risks again pushing us, be it on food security, on energy, but pushing us again into the wrong direction. Inequality is equally a big issue. As I've said many times, that too many, any system where too many people feel that they're excluded or have not a fair chance to participate will ultimately rebel against itself. And Catherine very eloquently explained that. And I believe we can see that. A world where 0.7% of the population has half the wealth and where 70% of the population has less than 3% is not a world that is going to work. Surely we're doing something wrong in this case if we don't fix that very fast. To say that sustainability is a key objective for anybody today, for any corporation for that matter, where I've spent more of my time, should not be a discovery. What is the point is really that I prefer actually not to talk about sustainability, because if I take the literal sense of the word sustainable, it really means that we're maintaining a status quo that is there to sustain it. But with these statistics that I've shared with you, sustaining something that isn't working, frankly, isn't setting the bar high enough anymore. COVID has shown us the complexities and the interrelationships of our Earth systems. It might have been a good revelation that we can't have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. The relationships between biodiversity destruction, climate change, human health, with the tragic death of George Floyd, the racial dimensions, and our economy is now clearer, I think, to more people. But it comes at a time that our societies, frankly, are being pulled apart. The issues of inequality, of poverty, of injustice on every measure, in every country, in every community, was already bad and unacceptable before COVID, but it has only put us back. And it comes at a time, frankly, I hate to say, that our political systems are stuck. In too many countries, we see populism, xenophobia, or nationalism being the prevailing form. In fact, over 100 countries since COVID have seen their democracies decline, and many countries are paralyzed by self-interest. Global governance structures that we put in place with multilateral institutions, frankly designed in 1944 and not adjusted anymore to the realities of today's world, are not functioning either the way they were meant to be. You know, look no further than the still only 15% vaccination that is happening in the developing world, when we are having more vaccines in this part of the world than we know what to deal with. Look no further than the climate fund. COP after COP after COP, we don't even have the courage to come up with what is now a meager 100 billion for a green climate fund, when we've just spent $17 trillion in Europe and the US alone to save lives and livelihoods around COVID. Now, time is running out. There's no question about it. We don't have until 2040 or 2050. Many companies making these commitments to be net zero by 2050, we really should laugh and refuse to accept that. We need to show that we have real plans that we're implementing between now and 2030. And that's why we're all calling this the decade of action. I think broadly people know where we need to go and the direction and what needs to be done. But what is clearly lacking is the speed and scale of what you might call ambitions. Sure, I was encouraged by the COP26 in Glasgow, where I spent about 10 days and see the commitments by many governments. Now 95% of emissions have made net zero commitments on climate change, a significant difference from what it was before COVID or what we had at the time of the COP21 in Paris. Also, almost all businesses now accept that they can't sit on the sidelines. Business cannot be a bystander in a system that gives them life in the first place. This enduring poverty that we see in many countries doesn't make a very good business case either. But we need business out there as a force for good. And you have this political void. You need business to step up this time to fill that void and to ensure that we move with the speed and scale. Sometimes individually, increasingly collectively, trying to drive these tipping points that we're all looking for. Now, many CEOs see this, but they're really struggling with, not with the why anymore, but really struggling with the how. And this is where we need help. And that's why I wrote this book with Andrew Winston, my dear friend, that I'll talk about in a minute. But time has never been better. And the opportunities to do so for business have never been bigger. We're really at a point, in fact, as COVID has shown, that the cost of not acting is actually significantly higher than the cost of acting, which in fact makes it so attractive to move. It also merges the interest of the multiple stakeholders and the shareholders, if you're willing to think a little bit longer term. Technology is mostly on our sides. We always underestimate the speed with which technology goes. Governments are moving, as we mentioned. Investors are waking up rapidly, not seeing it anymore just as a risk mitigation, but as an enormous opportunity to invest in. And frankly, you and this audience, if I may say a little cheeky, you know as well as I do that the financial community is most likely not driven by morality, but they certainly smell a big opportunity that when they see it. So we had $130 trillion in the GFANS initiative, the Glasgow Financial Alliance of Net Zero, where the financial market made commitments to decarbonize. In the proxy season now in the US, we see quite some request of companies to set the bar higher on ESG. Now, it's not surprising that this all is happening because the citizens of this world are not stupid. If you now switch on the television and you see the temperatures in Pakistan or in India, or the floodings that we just had in South Africa, we can just go around the world. But weather patterns are certainly not normal anymore. And any scientist, and I'm glad that you still support science in this case, would really clearly tell you that this man-induced climate change is very close to a tipping point in many different areas. So it's not surprising that the citizens of this world, especially the millennials and the Gen Zs, are demanding change. I think the great resignation that you now see in the US and many other places is not simply because they're trying to get another experience or accelerate their cellular progressions. No, they're looking for companies with purpose. They're trying to work for things that are a little bit bigger than they can achieve by themselves. And it's not surprising, therefore, that companies are moving as well. Initiatives and joint actions we're now seeing that we couldn't have dreamt of a few years ago. In nearly every sector now, even the high abatement sectors, there are leaders that have made real commitments to be net zero, be it shipping or cement or aluminum or all these other things. But still a long way to go. 80% of companies claim no visibility on scope 3, which is your value chain, when we know that most of the carbon emissions are in your value chain. Many companies making some sort of climate commitment, but only 15% in line with Paris, what is needed, what science requests, and very few making commitments to really cut the carbon by 2030 at the rate that we need it. So what is net positive? Net positive, how courageous companies thrive by giving more than they take, is really an attempt to create a movement to reframe what good looks like. Our vision of the future of capitalism, if you want to, just as Bill was referring to Roosevelt and the New Deal that bent the curve of capitalism, I think it's time to do the same thing again. A capitalism that is to the benefit of all stakeholders, as well as the environment, as well as the planet and future generations. So we want to drive this powerful mindset change and create that movement at all levels, including education, by the way. A critical mass of people, critical mass of companies can ultimately change, but it boils down to leadership. So what does this reframing look like? First of all, we have a very simple suggestion that companies should profit from solving the world's problems, not creating the world's problems. With a follow-up question to any CEO, that is the world better off because your company is in it or not? Most of the companies are still in the CSR space. I saw that at Glasgow as well. A little bit less plastics in the ocean, a little less carbon emission, a little bit less deforestation. I don't belittle that, but a little less when we've overshoot these planetary boundaries is simply not good enough anymore. I used to murder 10 people, now I murder 5 people. Am I a better murderer? It doesn't work like that. So they say, I get it. I want to be sustainable. Net zero commitments by 2050. Net zero isn't enough anymore either. Do no harm when harm is being done at an incredible scale already to the disadvantaged and the marginalized in this society is again not enough. The only thing that will work is if we think restorative, reparative, regenerative. And that is actually what we call net positive, actually leaving the world better than we found it. Just like nature regenerates itself, I don't think that we should demand anything less from companies as well. And this is what the book talks about. It actually identifies 5 simple steps that business can take to become net positive. First one, not surprisingly, is to take ownership of all the impacts and consequences of your company's presence here in this world, intended or not. You cannot outsource your value chain anymore and also outsource your responsibility. We also need to operate for the long term. We can't solve the issues of food security, climate change, or inequality in the rat race of quarterly reporting. We need to do it for the long-term benefit of business and society. That's why business was invented in the first place. Company comes from compañero in Espanol. That means breaking bread together. We're in this together. It is therefore also that net positive companies create a positive return for all stakeholders. In fact, they drive shareholder return as a result of what they do, not as a myopic goal. In Unilever, indeed, we deprioritize that as the only objective or reason for being and focused on the multiple stakeholders and creating a 300% shareholder return over the 10-year period, which I would call ample for any financial investor. And last but not least, a net positive company forces these broader partnerships that are needed to drive the bigger systems changes. What we're now trying to do is optimize things within a system that frankly isn't designed to deliver anymore. The good thing is that we see more and more companies making net positive commitments, taking more carbon out of the air than they put in, going to regenerative agriculture, restoring water at a better quality than they were using it, attacking the broader issues of social inclusion, investing in the Black community in the US, or financial inclusion globally, well beyond the company's own footprint. These are all examples of being net positive. And these companies are right, because they've discovered that it makes them increasingly more profitable as well. In 2021, about 80% of the ESG funds outperformed the non-ESG funds. Just Capital, which looked at the top 100 companies and ranked them according to purpose and serving society, found that the companies that ranked higher produced 56% higher shareholder return over 5 years. McKinsey finds the same way, that companies that operate for the longer term, invest in R&D and all the other things, have 47% higher revenue growth and are more profitable. We certainly saw that in Unilever, where our most purpose-driven brands were actually growing faster and were more profitable as well. If you're interested to look at more, look like the work that George Sarasan is doing at Harvard behind the weighted impact accounts. Now, all of this, I think, is not an issue of climate change or food security or poverty. These are symptoms. I think the real issue in this world is greed, is apathy, is selfishness. Ultimately, it starts with personal leadership. Rumi said it well when he said, he was a poet in the 13th century in Iran, when he said, like, yesterday I was smart, I tried to change the world. Now I'm wise, I'm trying to change myself. In the chapter, and that is why we start the book with that, it starts with a personal transformation and a very simple question: do you care? And that obviously starts with listening, starts with learning, understanding what the needs are of these multiple stakeholders. And what we have increasingly seen, especially during COVID, not only a bifurcation in companies being successful versus the ones that aren't around this multi-stakeholder model or not, but also a bifurcation in leadership, where leaders that expressed a certain sense of humanity or humility, where they were operating with a higher sense of purpose, embraced partnership, thought multi-generational, were to some extent these systemic thinkers. These companies were actually instilling, or these leaders were instilling, a higher level of trust, and their companies ultimately were doing better as well. So we argue, not surprisingly, that in order to heal the planet, we need to start healing ourselves first, but we can't do it alone. And this is where radical collaboration comes in. The book talks about 1 + 1 is 11, and it takes 3 to tango. I will not steal your thunder to go into it too much, but ultimately we need companies, civil society, and governments to work together to drive the right policies and frameworks to ensure that we go at the speed and scale that is needed. $1.8 trillion still on per first subsidies just in fossil fuel and agriculture alone, and the US is no exception. So getting the right legislation on the book is absolutely important. And here again, institutions like American University have an important role to play. You are not only responsible for future leaders, I think you're already responsible for ensuring that we have the impact that we're seeking right away, not only by changing ideas, but also shifting the research agendas to reflect the realities of today. Students like Stephanie and Taylor are setting the example, and we can only feel encouraged by having them around. It's not an easy time, frankly, to be students in this volatile world. Some of the surveys that we did for Glasgow showed that half of them don't even want children anymore. Climate anxiety is now one of the main diseases that psychiatrists have to deal with. But on the other hand, I have to say, your generation gives us hope, and you do need to demand this seat at the table. I would argue in many cases, you do need to demand the table itself. You are more purpose-driven, as I mentioned, more creative, more innovative. And that is why I am actually encouraged by that. So my advice to you as students is to be realistic, but look for solutions within your world of reality that you can influence. Find the sweet spot between what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and what the world needs. Discover your purpose and then join these companies where you can make that come alive. Stay away from the ones that don't. Let them head to the graveyard of dinosaurs. In all of this, stay curious, ensure that you continuously learn, stay humble, and above all, spend your time wisely. Time is probably the most precious commodity that you have. It was Benjamin Franklin who said, "You may delay, but time will not, and lost time will never be found again." So challenges like climate change, inequality ought to be high on everybody's agenda. I hope they're high on your agenda as well. And ultimately, although the road to change is not that easy and full of challenges and skeptics and cynics, it is your strong sense of purpose that you have that ultimately gives me the confidence that we will prevail in addressing these issues. I always like to quote the Dalai Lama, who said that if you seek enlightenment for yourself, simply to enhance yourself and your position, you actually miss purpose. But if you seek enlightenment for yourself to enable you to serve others, you are with purpose. You're a very fortunate group of people to go to these universities, to be to some extent independent and intellectually gifted, but you only belong to the 5% of the world's population. I would argue it is your duty, our obligation to put ourselves to the service of the other 95%. Thank you for listening and lead a life with purpose. And thank you once more for this incredible honor. And Bill, for this award named after you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And again, congratulations on being the 2022 recipient of the William K. Reilly Environmental Leadership Award. And thank you for these very thoughtful, inspiring, and challenging remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Let me just say, which is obvious, I think, to all of us who have heard these presentations, they are profoundly inspiring and insightful messages. Catherine, I was struck listening to you that I come from the Midwestern farm country and still have a farm and go back to my farm regularly. And there is an alienation in rural America that has not attracted the kind of attention, particularly from the environmental community, from some of the non-governmental organizations that are otherwise influential, that it deserves. And it's had consequences. And acceptance of the science of climate change, for example, is not deep. It's not necessarily denied, but it's certainly not a cause of action. And regenerative farming, I have tried very hard to get that to be attended to in the Midwest, and it's an uphill battle. But what you said about the environment and the water needs, the water problems, I think about the Texas border and the colonias there. I think about the Indian reservations in the United States and the fact that they were told that they had the highest incidence of COVID in the country, and they were told to wash their hands, and 50% of the Navajo reservation, the biggest, didn't even have running water. You are engaged in a very significant enterprise, and I compliment you for it, and it's stirring to listen to you. Paul, I do remember you. I remember you well. There were no other CEOs who had the combination of stature and influence that you exercised during your years at Unilever. I have a particular affection for Unilever because I was a controlling investor of the largest drip irrigation company in India. My investment private equity group was involved with water in developing countries. And so we invested in Jain Irrigation Systems Limited. And we worked with small farmers and tried to convince them that they could save much more water and use it more efficiently if they had drip irrigation instead of taking from the deep and declining water table. And we financed their growing onions, which were then sold to Unilever for onion soup, and mangoes, which were sold to Coca-Cola for drinks. And the kind of principles that you established, and more important, I think, the conjunction of idealism and financial success, performance, attracted a great deal of attention, and I think has many, many emulators. It strikes me particularly about the two presentations we have heard is that these are people who are very experienced with the real world, who do not for a moment underestimate. Well, we heard them describe the kinds of conflicts we have, the kinds of challenges that they see the world on the planet facing. And nevertheless, their fundamental message is one of hope and confidence and inspiration. I think we have been favored to hear profoundly important, succinct, compelling messages. And I hope that we can cause others who've not heard these messages to attend to them. I believe we've recorded everything. Well, I see that my system here that we have recorded it. And I will do what I can to make sure that they are heard, that these messages are heard and taken seriously. I think given who delivered them, they will be. So immense thanks to everybody who participated in this program, and particularly to Taylor and Stephanie. My heart goes out to you. I so love the I want to say brotherhood and sisterhood of the winners of these awards over the past 10 years, and take such pride in them. And I was saying to Dan and Vicki the other day that I really would like to see us get together, because I think one of you could help another, and we could all profit by sharing our examples, because you are outstanding exemplars of the effective application of an education in public policy to its practice. I am once again honored to be part of the program. Turn it over to you, Dan.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Wow, those were fabulous presentations. I wrote down inspirational, visionary, but also with a realistic grasp of the sense of the challenge. And what I have noticed in working with Bill Reilly over the years, and noticed today, is that environmental leaders these days recognize the depths of the challenges and the serious barriers to creating a better world, but they also are optimists. They believe that there are solutions and we can work toward them. So that was fabulous today. So thank you to everybody who was part of the program today. Congratulations, especially to Paul and Catherine and Stephanie and Taylor. We like to look at the Reilly program as a way to develop the future generation of environmental leaders. So that's an important part of what we do. Thanks to our awards committee, Leah Allen, Mamie Parker, Francis Prisnar, Tom Murray, Adam Kushner. Thanks to Professor Karen Baylor, who worked with me on the scholarship selections, to Danielle Miller-Wagner, who makes this all happen, and to Gordon Binder, who has been an important part of the Reilly program from the beginning, and also to the SPA events and communication teams. So we have a couple of upcoming events that are listed on this slide. Todd Eisenstadt, the research director for the Center for Environmental Policy, has organized a fabulous series on ideas, interests, and nation-state climate politics. So you see some upcoming events on May 10th on adaptation, May 12th on carbon pricing, and May 16th on looking at Australia and Brazil. So with that, as they say at the end of sports events, another William K. Reilly Awards event is in the books. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. We look forward to seeing you in person on the American University campus next year. And good afternoon.